Okay, hello, welcome to Congressman Don Bacon's Lunch and Learn. We are going to be talking about sex trafficking in Nebraska. I'm Danielle Jensen, I'm with the Congressman's staff. Just some quick reminders, this is a listen-only webinar. We will have contact information at the end if you have questions or if you want to get in touch with the people on the panel. If you do need assistance right now, if you are a victim of sex trafficking or if you know someone who may be, please call 911 right now. We will have other contact information available, like I said, at the end. But if you need assistance right now, just please call 911. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Congressman Bacon, and he's going to lead the conversation with our panelists. So go ahead.
Well, thank you, Danielle, for organizing this. I want to thank our team here of experts that we're going to talk about sex trafficking. And really, we want to learn from you today is our goal. And to hear your missionary for your organization, but also your observations, what you're seeing in Omaha, and how we can do better fighting this. And I'll just say right up front, we know sex trafficking creates permanent, long-term scars for so many. And we need to be dedicated to fighting the sex trafficking trade. And it's an international problem at the level of about 600 to 800,000 folks internationally every year. And in the United States itself, we're looking at between 14,500 to 17,500 are trafficked inside of our country each year. And I would like to hear your observations, what we're seeing in Omaha itself, and when we go around the table. The definition of sex trafficking, I think, is important because I think you all educated me on this, a better definition when you visited me in my office, so I appreciate that. But the definition that you've all given me is when someone uses fraud, force, or coercion to cause a commercial sexual act with an adult or cause a minor to commit a commercial sex act. And learning from you, about 80% of our victims are female and about 50% are underage, which is a terrible statistic. I'm on the Homeland Security Committee, and we have fusion centers here all over the country where we try to work on this. So it's important for me to learn this so we can make sure our Homeland Security Committee and our fusion centers are oriented right to help combat the sex trafficking trade. Finally, I just want to say I'm a co-sponsor of the Extending Justice for Sex Crimes Victims Act. And it's extending the statute of limitations for victims so they can go back and whether it's through lawsuits or through criminal activity, we'll be able to go after those perpetrators for a lot longer time. And I think that's important. So with that, I want to initially introduce Federico Vicente. He's with the Salvation Army. And if you would, just give us about a 5-minute, 7-minute description of what you're doing with the sex trafficking trade, how we're trying to combat this in Omaha.
So I'm the Committee and Community Outreach Coordinator for the Salvation Army's Fight to End Trafficking program. Our program dedicates itself in empowering victims to continue their lives out of that world. We particularly provide any kind of resources that they need and serve all demographics, male or female. It does not matter whether they're sex trafficked or labor trafficked. We particularly, most of our clients are individuals who have been out of the sex trafficking ring. However, we've had clients who are just at that critical stage, at that critical moment. We serve them. We provide them any resources that they need, whether it's housing, whether it's continuing education, whether it's getting out of that substance abuse. So that is basically the main frame of our program. Fortunately, we've been able to serve 62 clients in this past years.
62.
62, yes. And primarily,
this is in 2018.
2017.
2017, gotcha.
We've been provided resources for 62 clients. And that's a good number, particularly because human trafficking victims, particularly sex trafficking victims, tend to come in and out of that world, or we may not have that constant communication as we would like.
I assume finding housing or shelter is probably the preeminent concern.
That is
with yes. Folks you meet.
Yes, that's one of the critical resources that are needed when it comes to sex trafficking victims. Mm-hmm. They come out of these world where they don't have any money to their name or any property with them in their name, and so they need a place to stay, whether it's a safe house because their traffickers after them because they are in a dangerous situation, or whether it is that they are homeless at that moment and they just need a place to stay for a while so they can get on their feet. So housing is a particular issue when it comes to trafficking, and here in Nebraska. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, in the Omaha area, we have safe houses and we have housing available. Also, fortunately, the domestic violence shelters have opened the doors to human trafficking victims as well. But when it comes to around the state, because we are a program that covers the whole state of Nebraska,
Right.
We are finding difficulties, particularly in the western part of the state and the rural parts of the state when it comes to housing. Yes.
So it looks to me like about one person a week or a little more than one person a week is seeking shelter and protection. And I think you mentioned some of these folks are under risk or threat. And so you have to, so that's also a factor for you.
Yes.
When you're.
That's a main factor because depending on their situation, their actual situation, is whether we can put them in a domestic violence shelter or we can put them in a trafficking shelter. But also, if their life is in danger, then we would have to directly put them in a safe house. There's no other option. Their life is in danger, and if they go to a domestic violence shelter or to a trafficking shelter, they're putting the lives of the other people at risk because of the traffickers. Because we've seen traffickers have erratic behavior, right? They're hunting them down.
Wow.
And they will use any means necessary to get them back into that world.
Right. Well, thank you. Anything else?
So the way to contact our to get resources from the safety program, we say to call the National Trafficking Resource Center, which is 1-888-373-7888. Just ask for a trafficking specialist.
Right.
And be specific that you want resources in Nebraska. That way, the Resource Center will direct you directly to a trafficking specialist from the state.
At the very end, we'll put up the contact information again. Okay, so next I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Power. She's the Director of Marketing and Public Relations for the Women's Center for Advancement in Omaha, and I was just at their new building, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So please tell us about your mission and what you're seeing here in the local area.
So the Women's Center for Advancement, or WCA, we've got a really long name, we like to shorten it. We are the leading agency in town that focuses specifically on serving victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and stalking. That's all we do, and we have a great team of direct service members who really focus on that immediate safety concern for our clients. So creating that safety plan, getting them protection orders or filing police reports, medical attention if they need that, immediate housing. That's often a concern as well, that's safe. I think everyone at this table knows how difficult that can be and how crucial that is for our clients. But we also have attorneys on staff, therapists on staff to help with crisis counseling, family law, immigration services, and then career counselors who help with that long-term safety as well. Last year,
You have some medical access too, right?
We do. We partner very closely with our SANE department, sexual assault nurse examiners in Omaha. We've been so happy to see that grow. It used to only be at Methodist Hospital. Now it's at all of our area hospitals, which is tremendous because those nurses are so key to helping victims of sex trafficking, of sexual assault, of domestic violence, because they go through that special training that helps them understand what their patients and our clients are dealing with emotionally and not just physically, but and then collecting all that evidence.
Right.
Even if that patient doesn't necessarily know if they want to press charges, but having that evidence in case they do want to press charges, you know, and even looking longer term down the road, being able to press charges and kind of find and seek their justice, you know, when they're ready, because they may not be ready right away.
So it's important to extend out the statute of limitations.
It is. It's incredibly important to extend that statute of limitations for our clients because there's so much emotional. It's not black and white when you're talking about these crimes, these sexual crimes. It's difficult for someone to recognize they're in a trafficking situation sometimes because there is that force, fraud, and coercion. Coercion is so hard to understand sometimes and explain, but it is so powerful.
Some of it can be manipulation or where they don't even realize they're being coerced, right?
Exactly.
And so then it is a tricky thing to figure out. And probably it maybe takes a while to realize they are a victim.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, force is really easy to understand. If you're putting a gun to my head and telling me I have to do this, you understand that I'm being forced to do this. Coercion is so much more manipulative and so much based on your emotions. And many times in that trafficking situation, there is a relationship. It's not always or often being kidnapped in the middle of the night and becoming a victim of trafficking. It is frequently somebody you know, somebody you care about and probably have a relationship with. So that coercion just makes it so murky. But our specialists, our Indigo program launched last year with federal funding. And we're so fortunate to have it. We've blown away our expectations of our goals for how many clients we wanted to serve halfway through and even at the end of the year.
It's good news and bad news, isn't it?
It is good news and bad news. It's good news that people are receiving the assistance that they need. And it's so sad that there are so many people in Omaha who need that assistance. So
How much of it are you finding is drug influenced, where people are dependent on drugs and drugs is being used as a way to coerce?
absolutely, drugs can very often, and Julie, I'm sure you see this, and Federico too. I mean, it's so easy for a trafficker to have their victim become addicted to drugs. Even they maybe weren't even all that interested to begin with, but they really become addicted. And then it's that, well, you want to keep having this, you got to stay here. You're not going to be able to afford this on your own. Nobody else is going to get this. Or even, I'm going to tell the authorities you're using drugs. You're going to be jailed because of this. And there's some really interesting legislation happening in Nebraska now too, to help victims of trafficking who have those drug charges on their records because of trafficking experiences, and being able to seal them and not have that hold their future and not change their future. Let people who have come out of trafficking and want to have a normal life have that normal life without those charges holding them back.
It's called the set-aside bill, and it should go up to in Nebraska State Senate in this term, in this session. So we're hoping that bill actually does pass, because it would help a lot of the trafficking victims that we provide resources for.
Okay, great to know. Thank you. Anything else?
We're excited to be here. We're excited that people are talking about it. And we always remind people, though, that it's so critical to focus on victims of trafficking, but also not to forget victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, because you can't really care about trafficking without caring about those other elements, because they're so intertwined. Just to remember to care about all of these crimes that are impacting people in such a horrible way.
I think when you guys came in earlier this year, I had no idea the scope of the problem in the local area. I think you sort of know it's there, but not at the amount and the level and how blatant it really is. And so it's clearly is a big issue for our local area. So let me introduce now Julie and Allie. If you would introduce yourselves, and from the president and founder of the Rejuvenating Women, and tell us about your mission and what you're working on.
We help victims and survivors of human trafficking. So it is solely human trafficking, which would be the labor and sex piece as well. And we have a house where we can help the women. They can live there for up to 2 years. And we've implemented, it's taken us a while, many months to come up with a program that is very stable and brings them that stability so that they can start learning how to function outside of what had happened while dealing with many issues, as you were saying. I mean, there's that trauma piece.
There's long-term scars that have to be dealt with.
Long-term, and I mean, even the 2-year program isn't long enough, but it's at least a start to help them get on their path. We have counselors that are on staff with us who do the EMDR, which is now, I think they're looking at that. I know you guys, Salvation Army does it too. The EMDR piece that really helps the trauma piece and bring that to the surface and even a quicker healing for the individual. We do serve only female survivors of human trafficking,
which is about 80% is what
about 80%. But I also think in that, if I could say that there's a male population as well that have been affected that don't get reported, but because I think a lot of the male population there's a stigma with them coming forward and saying, hey, this happened to me. I mean, I've actually been speaking with more people that's the case.
Wow.
And so I think that number is actually higher in male than what we think.
Okay.
But we in our program, our focus is we also offer legal services through a legal partner here in Omaha that's nationally known, and through that we also do the branding, tattoo removals. We'll offer that through a medical company that we work with as well, which I think is huge because when they come in, we've had people reach out to us and say, I see that on your website. How can I get my tattoo removed?
Yeah.
Because that is such.
Could you talk a little about the
reminder.
tattoo? How's the tattoo associated with
Sure.
sex trafficking?
Well, it's their traffickers brand them. They'll brand them. And they'll brand them inside the lip, on the eyelids. They'll brand them in places even where we can't see. I mean, the traffickers have gotten smarter. And they're not branding them so publicly so that we can be at the store and visualize, see that on them. But they're still branding them with their own names or their trafficker name with barcodes. I think they're doing.
Someone trying to come out of that and recover would definitely want that removed.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
It's hard for them because they're constantly looking in the mirror and seeing this reminder. And so I think by working with this medical group that we work with now, by them offering that to them, they will offer 5 women a year up to 6 treatments. And if it takes more treatments, if we need more women going in, then we'll pay for that. So that's part of what we raise funds for.
Great.
Yeah, so we just do all that we can. I'll let Allie even speak on more what we're doing, but really the housing piece, we're not a safe house. I think that's important to say too. I know at one point we tried the safe house piece. That's not where we should have been. But we're more the recovery. So we really focus on the recovery piece. So whether an individual is trafficked currently, or whether someone was trafficked 20 years ago.
Right.
If they've never gone through a program that specifically works on those pieces, the program's for them. And they don't have to live in the house to be a part of our program. We do our day programming in a different facility. So then that way, anyone who has been trafficked can do the program piece, which is from 9 to about 1:30, Monday through Thursday.
Okay.
So.
Allie, anything else?
You said it.
Okay.
I will say I'm Allie. I'm Julie's assistant. I work in administration and networking.
Yeah, she does more than that. She's amazing. So
Thank you.
It's always a team.
more than that.
Team
Yeah, it is
wins,
a team.
right?
It is a team.
So we were talking before we started the webinar, and you guys were explaining just the scope of the problem in Omaha. Can you give our listeners just an idea of what happens every day or weekly, however you want to frame it? Because some of the details you were sharing were just terrible. And I'll start with you.
Well, when you look at the Creighton study, 900 victims of human trafficking per month just in Nebraska alone.
900 a month.
That's just off one website. That's off one trafficking website.
Yeah.
That doesn't include all of the amount of people, male and female, that were trafficked that have never reported that, that were never on these websites. There are still people that walk the streets. You go downtown, you will still see people walking the streets. It's not as prevalent, but it still happens. There are also, I'm going to put a little spin on this, and I will tell you that over the past 5-6 months, we have had a tremendous amount of adults come to us that say, I was trafficked by my parents. I was trafficked by my father. I was trafficked by my uncle. And what do you have for me? What can you do for me?
Well, that's terrible to hear.
A lot. And you know what? That was never reported. Their parents they're still protecting their parents today because they're still afraid. They're still, that manipulation doesn't go away.
So what you're saying on one website, about 30 a day.
Oh, easily.
Just trying to get to 900. Right.
Oh, easily. Did you happen to look up?
Yeah, just at noon today, there were 25 on Backpage.
25 already today on one page.
At noon.
And that's not saying all of them are human trafficking victims.
Right.
But, there must have been some kind of issue to want to sell yourself.
Right.
If you don't mind, could you explain what Backpage is? Some people may not know.
So Backpage is a website that similar to that of Craigslist, where you can sell, buy, whatever you feel like, basically. There's a section that has been dominated by commercial sex. And most of the individuals who are advertised in Backpage have some sort of relationship to a sex trafficking ring, whether it's one trafficker or whether it's 2 traffickers or more. they have some relationship to it. The Creighton Human Trafficking Initiative, based in Creighton University here at Omaha, has been able to create algorithms and a process in which they can identify the individuals who are being trafficked and actually report that to law enforcement. So can law enforcement take
But if
action?
you can see this, why can't law enforcement see it now and intercept
They can.
this? Okay.
They can and they do. You might be able to speak more on that.
The safety program is co-coordinated with the Nebraska Attorney General's Office of the Nebraska Human Trafficking Task Force. It's a multidisciplinary approach to human trafficking. And we concentrate in what is providing services to trafficking victims, creating those service networks. The WCA works with us constantly. And we also provide training and presentations to as community awareness. As part of the task force, we've been able to create a dynamic where when law enforcement does engage with these individuals and does start investigations, however, it may be a long process or a short process. It all depends on the willingness of the trafficker or the individual to actually participate in the process of creating sting investigations. We've seen in the past, and actually recently, operations that have been conducted through contacting individuals in Backpage. It's like everything in trafficking, it's a complicated process. It's not as clear as we would like it to be. Yeah.
Elizabeth, you have anything to add?
They talked about it beautifully, but I think Federico did mention a little bit about the Nebraska Human Trafficking Task Force, and it is a great group of people in this state who it is a multidisciplinary task force, and it's just another way that we're as a society we're kind of behind on learning how to combat human trafficking. We are getting up to speed quickly, and unfortunately, as Julie mentioned, traffickers understand what we're learning, and then they change their modes too. Those tattoos used to be a lot more visible than hiding them, inside your mouth or under an eyelid, and so it's difficult. But the good news is that I always hate to talk about such a difficult subject without making sure that people understand there is hope, and there are a lot of people who are working hard to make sure that this does end. The task force has really, it's so important for all of those disciplines to talk and make sure that we all understand what the other is dealing with and what we're learning too, so we can be smarter, we can learn quicker. And I do believe that Nebraska, because of our interstates and just where we are and what we host as a state, we have a unique situation where human trafficking can become very prevalent.
Let's dig into that a little bit. So what makes Omaha have the amount of problem it has? You talked about the interstates. Maybe you could just share with our viewers, our listeners, a little more about that.
Trucking companies love the Midwest because it's a great hub, and Omaha is a great hub because we have easy access to a couple different interstates.
I-80, I-29, 75.
They mostly all intertwine at some point because those interstates are, they make it easy access to move people. And that's not to say that every trafficking victim is moved from city or state. As you get into more populated areas, there doesn't have to be quite as much movement. In
Omaha
areas.
particularly, we see, because to be trafficking, the individual doesn't have to be moved. So in Omaha, we've seen in many cases that the individual was never moved from their location. That it was trafficked in their home. It was trafficked
talking about parents trafficking their children.
And we see that a lot with parents trafficking their children. You don't need that movement. However, the interstates that connect and that go through Omaha make Omaha a hub for human trafficking, particularly because we're in the middle between two large cities, which is Denver and Chicago. And there's a lot of movement through our state. So that makes it a more popular area, what we say a hub for these actions.
And then we bring some of those big events, College World Series, Berkshire Hathaway, Olympic swim trials. We bring that where lots of people are traveling to Omaha as well. And even Omahans are looking for it's my weekend to have fun. And unfortunately, their version of fun is criminal.
So maybe I'd like to dig into that a little bit more. I think a lot of people think prostitution is a victimless crime, but yet we know a large percentage are folks who are being coerced, manipulated, enslaved. So if you could maybe expound on that.
There is a researcher, her name's Melissa Farley. She's a PhD. She's done a ton of research on this. You can find all of her things online. 1%. She's come up with 1% of the population is prostitution by choice. Only 1%.
That's an incredible number.
It
I don't think
is.
many people know that.
They don't. And in all that, what she says is, again, what gets anyone to wake up in the morning or go to bed at night or whatever and say, I'm going to sell myself to someone I don't know or multiple people I don't know for money.
Right.
There are factors that come into play even before that. And what we've also discovered is that there's that sexual abuse that has occurred prior to that. So the majority, and I don't remember the percentage of the amount of people that have been sexually abused prior to choosing to sell yourself for money.
Right.
So in that it's much more complex than just that it's a victimless crime,
Right.
because there's a great chance there that they were a victim of something else prior to that.
Right.
And a lot of times it's within the home, it's within the family that someone is abusing them,
Right.
neglecting them. Mom's addicted to crack, sitting on the couch, whatever. Dad's in prison. I mean, there are so many factors that come into play, and I've heard so many stories from the victims themselves of what happened, and it's horrific.
Anything else to add? Well, let me dig into this again a little more. So 99% are in some ways coerced or don't feel like they have a choice.
Yep.
And so it's not a victimless crime.
It's not.
And so I sometimes think that we as a society focus on the prostitute or the victim in this case. And we do a lot of our punishment law enforcement directed that way. I was in a hearing in Washington where I suggested we should be going after the person who's trying to buy or the,
Yes.
and we need to do
Yes.
much more there. We should be advertising who we arrest.
Yes.
There should be some shame involved.
Absolutely.
And the penalty should be there. And I think there should be the focus in that area because they're the ones who are creating more victims. What do you think?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I agree that the penalties should be increased. Fortunately, last year LB 289 was passed in the Nebraska State Senate, which increased the penalties
It did.
in human for human
Okay.
trafficking,
Yep.
and also for those who solicit.
Right.
We've had regarding the publication of individuals who have trafficked. For example, in our community outreach, we've seen a backlash in which we're doing a presentation where we present the traffickers, and an individual in the audience is their nephew, and they have no correlation with the act that their uncle committed.
Right.
So that may incite some sort of bullying, some sort of negative outcome.
Yeah.
However, depending on the audience, we can present those individuals.
Right.
And if it's in a news realm, in the news, for example, well, you may show that individual. However, we've seen that showing who are the traffickers at the same time as showing who are the victims may be a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
So it's like everything in trafficking, everything is extremely complicated. There's no simple solution to this.
Right.
So we've actually studied this about going in and publishing those individuals in billboards or in our presentations, and we've seen that there's some sort of backlash to it in some cases.
Yeah.
However, I'm not against.
I just would think as a deterrence that would impact
Right.
some folks, I would
Right.
think.
Well,
Steer some people away.
And and what I would suggest is doing like a record like those who are sex offenders, for example.
Right.
A public record, that would be
Right.
fantastic.
Well, and that's been discussed in legislation, been shot down every time.
Right.
So, I think it needs to be discussed again, as Frederica was saying, and
So should we make the basis that these are victims, not a
right.
victimless crime? And if I think we
Right.
have that as our assumption,
Right.
it makes it easier to say, hey, this is a sex crime.
that's right.
Right.
That's
There
right.
is a new advertising campaign too geared to purchasers. So it's a pretty harsh campaign
Yeah.
focusing on who those purchasers might be and letting them know that they're being watched, that it's not going unseen. People know that this is happening and they will be caught. So there's, as I said, this task force is important. We're a little behind as a society, but we're catching up quick, and some great strides have been made.
I got to second something you said, the task force. I talked to some of the law enforcement folks part of that. Very professional,
Yes.
very sharp, compassionate. I was way impressed.
Yes, they care a lot about this. They care a lot about this.
Law enforcement, we're moving forward in regards to human trafficking. Fortunately, the task force has finished what would be a manual for identifying and action for law enforcement on human trafficking.
Right.
And hopefully that should be going out by the end of this year. So, and law enforcement has been extremely cooperative. They've been eager to go into the trainings, eager on doing the investigations, whether it's local police department or Nebraska State Patrol, or federal agencies like Department of Homeland Security, their ICE, for example. They have been extremely cooperative, and they've been excited to work with us for that.
So I think one of the things I'd like to do is dispel probably an assumption many have that the sex trafficking is only happening in certain parts of our town. Could you illuminate that where you find it, it could be in the most built up part of our town or the most wealthiest parts of our town? If you could share what your observations on that, I think would be helpful.
It does. It happens everywhere. I would strongly recommend, if you think that any type of violence happens in one place of town and not the other, to realize that violence has absolutely no prejudice. It will take who it can take.
Yeah, with Omaha having 675 victims, according to the Creighton study, 675 just in Omaha per month. There's a heat map that you can find on the Women's Fund of Omaha website as well, that will show you the different parts of Nebraska, Gretna, the Valley, Nebraska, so Douglas counties.
Gretna, Valley.
Yeah.
Yes.
Those are Hastings. They're Grand Island. I mean, if you go on there, you can see, and they did this heat map, so you can see where the red, orange, or starts getting more green, where there's a tremendous amount of activity.
Right. So a lot of people are probably assuming not in my neighborhood, but it is.
It is in their neighborhood.
Right.
And the thing is too, is that, and we see this in the news, we see that we go on Facebook and we're seeing reports of this. Out of a great suburban home, there was someone, that was being trafficked out of somebody's basement, out of this $1 million home. I mean, it happens everywhere, and there's no neighborhood immune to it.
Right.
And partly because, I believe that there is such depravity and evil in out there in the world. I mean, we hear about it all the time.
Yeah.
And we hear, there is a correlation between human trafficking and pornography, and what fuels the buyers is pornography. No longer can they just view it on TV and it's okay, or on their phones anymore, and that's all they need. Now they've got to go out there and buy a child. They got to go buy a person. So I think the pornography is a huge issue that needs to be addressed also within legislation at some point on how to address that. So
Anybody else? Oh, that's some great points.
So in regards to Omaha region, in the same Women's Fund publication, you may find a map that demonstrates Omaha, the city of Omaha, and how they're advertised in the city of Omaha. And to the surprise of many, the hotspot in Omaha is West Omaha,
Yes.
which is known to be a socially economic high area. And a lot of it has to do because there's expendable income. And individuals that engage in these types of acts have the expendable income to spend in
So you're seeing a predominant number in Western Omaha.
Yep. And it's hidden very well. It's hidden right before your eyes.
Right.
I think too, to remember, not to scare anybody by mentioning this, but a purchaser or somebody who decides to become a trafficker doesn't follow a particular profile either. We've seen several stories in the last couple of years of high schoolers who are charged with trafficking because they're, finding girls in high school who they create that relationship with, they groom them, and then they coerce them into selling sex and purchasing sex from someone else. And so that's, it just doesn't have a profile. It's happening where you think it's not happening. And it's so critical for us to be talking about it as a community, because that's the only way we'll get close to ending it.
Right.
And you bring up that piece of it in high school, and which then brings in the parental piece. I have back when my daughter was a teenager, it was, you let her have her privacy and don't invade her space, and don't. I mean, there's some truth to that, but there's also as parents, and I say this everywhere I speak, I may ruffle feathers, but I think parents need to be a little bit more nosy with who their kids are talking to, who their friends are. So who are they talking to online? Who's Snapchat? Who's that on your Snapchat? Because these traffickers hide as 15-year-old boys, as 15-year-old girls. And so parents need to.
So who they think they're talking to is somebody totally different.
Absolutely,
Right.
and it happens. I mean, we hear
Deception.
about it in that Loof case. That's what happens. Who you're talking to is not who you think they are.
You're talking about the victim that was out in central Nebraska?
Yes.
Right.
And those cases happen more times than not. I've been in schools and I've talked to teachers and teachers will say, hey, this girl, can you talk to her because she's talking to this boy and we're pretty sure that that's not who it is. And we've heard the traffickers themselves say, that they go for the vulnerable, the ones, the victims who are vulnerable. And so if you have a 15-year-old girl who thinks that she's not pretty and thinks that she's overweight and is not lovable, that is someone that those traffickers try to go
And they
for.
identify that. That's what they're looking for.
Yes. Yep. They sure do. And they will play on that and they get them hook, line, and sinker.
So one of the things that you shared with me in our office was that you do training with folks in the hotel staffs, airports, areas where the trafficking occurs. Could you, and a lot of this is right in front of us and we don't know it because we're not looking for it, but could you talk about some of the things that you can see that's like an identifiable thing that say, hey, there may be a problem here, or how do you do the training? I think that would be very educational.
You want it?
I'll let you piggyback on this, and certainly Federico, if you have more too. There's a new movement. There's a new PSA actually that came out of Michigan that we are loving to take a spin on our training and education piece. And it is really geared towards, they'd be your MUD workers, your Cox workers, your, OPPD linemen who have to come out and fix lines. Those people who are out there having free access to your home, Nebraska Furniture Mart delivery men who come into your house and bring you that couch because there's no way I'm going to carry that up the stairs to my living room. And helping those employees and those organizations understand some really good pieces that might be a little odd, and they maybe just probably don't even notice it because they go into 16 different homes a day and they're focused on their job. But if they notice that there's a door with a giant lock on it,
Red flag.
That's a red flag, like for anything.
Right.
If they notice that maybe somebody tries to come out and they get pushed back by somebody who seems to be the dominant person, that's another red flag. And just helping them, they don't have to intercede. They don't have to say, hey, I think you might be having some trafficking in this house.
Right.
All they need to do is know the resources to call and report their concerns.
So you're providing training to these kinds of folks that are going into homes. That's great.
It is, because it's so, and like what an easy thing to do, and what a great concerned citizen. And then that person who we train can go home and talk to their family and their friends about, I had this really interesting training I never thought we'd talk about at work today, but can you believe this happened? And then just those word of mouth, that training element is so critical, whether it's with employees, whether it's with schools, or even just other volunteer groups, to help people start to understand that this is happening. And there is something, you don't have to go be Julie and start your own organization that's going to help hundreds and hundreds of women. That'd be great if you want to do that. I don't think anybody here is going to stop that. But, just to be aware of it and make the phone call if you're concerned. Have conversations with your kids about, you are worthy, you are important, you are loved.
Yes.
And there are people who might try and tell you differently, and just don't listen to them.
That's right.
You know the truth. So it's just
right.
so important to have those conversations.
So as the task force, the Nebraska Human Trafficking Task Force, last year we conducted 7 labor trafficking specific trainings, which are open to basically to law enforcement and social service providers and almost to everybody in the public. And the year before, we actually conducted 7 sex trafficking trainings as well for law enforcement
Excellent
trainings and for the public. And as a safety program, we do community awareness. I actually go out into the communities to church groups, whether to other organizations or agencies, doing that community awareness, doing that presentation on human trafficking in Nebraska, and presenting in the stats and what to look for and what you can do and how you should respond to it.
Right.
And on the other hand, the Coalition on Human Trafficking has the Hotel Motel Project, which they actually celebrated this past month, training more than 100 hotels in Omaha.
100 hotels in Omaha have had the training
on human trafficking, on identifying sex and labor trafficking. So we're seeing a big movement with, particularly with the hospitality
Those
industry.
workers will be able to spot this more readily.
Exactly. We know about these housekeeping that goes into those rooms and they clean the room, but they are not looking for these things that may identify as human trafficking. And we've seen in Omaha that a lot of the sex trafficking is conducted in hotels and motels. So having that staff trained is an excellent step to fighting human trafficking and being aware of it and knowing how to respond to it.
I think it's an incredible number, 100 hotel employees.
Yeah. And they're looking to expand as well to other parts of Nebraska. So we're seeing these movements spreading out throughout the state, which is very important because we can try to fight here in Omaha by itself, but what we're going to do in the other areas. We want to eradicate this from the whole state.
That's right.
Julie, you have more?
I love what you guys were saying about that. I'll tell you what I've even discovered recently is that churches, our victims are hiding in churches. They're hiding in churches, and they're going to churches. The majority of the victims that I come across that may not have known anything about religion, or they may not have a preference. There is something spiritual that they're seeking, and they will go to church. I got a call last week from someone, a ministry leader, a woman showed up with all of her things and showed up at a church and said, "I'm being trafficked, I'm being sought after, can you help me?"
Please help me.
Yep. And so I think what I've noticed is more churches that are talking about this from the pulpit, and they need to.
Yeah.
We're still not where we should be, in my opinion.
I think it's a great point.
But we need to be taught. I mean, people think that hey, no, I mean, we walk into a church and we think everybody's got their stuff together and they got their smiling faces on.
So everybody's trying to
come on. I mean, the reality is we're all broken people, and they're hiding in our churches, and we need to be cognizant of that and realize that.
Now, you touched on the internet and how that's being used to fuel, or at least facilitate this crime and the victims. What are some of the things we can do to help safeguard our children from this? And you touched on it a little bit, but I want to just make this a topic of discussion.
Yeah.
So I think, Julie mentioned to be engaged and active parents. We made fun of helicopter parents, but they had something going there, right? They knew what their kids were doing. I think it's important as a parent or somebody who knows a young person. You don't have to be a parent to make this difference in a young person's life, but it's important to have conversations with kids about internet safety, about the reality of people can pose as people they're not, and to understand that, and to understand how dangerous it can be to their own personal safety. And sometimes it's easier for kids to have the understanding that not only could it maybe impact you, but it could impact our whole family.
Right.
And help them understand that it's not just one person. By no means do we want to put, the weight of the world on any child, but to help them really understand the reality of it in a safe and comfortable conversation that's appropriate. The way I talk to my 5-year-old son is not the way I talk to my 10-year-old daughter. And having those conversations, but then to be engaged, to have rules, to understand the technology your children are using, which can be really difficult because it's changing all the time. And kids are really good at hiding things and rolling their eyes when you say, "Let me see your phone and teach me these new programs you're using." And just, it's hard, but it's so critical. It's worth the effort to protect your children and to protect any children in your life, to make sure that this doesn't happen to them and it doesn't happen to your family. It's protecting your family as well.
Right. That's excellent. That's exactly what I would say too.
Then we have the College World Series coming up in a few months. How are we working with law enforcement to ramp up and to put focus on this?
So,
No, you go ahead.
So law enforcement is fairly aware that the College World Series has a lot of impact when it comes to the sex trade here in Nebraska. Fortunately, last year, through the numerous investigations that have been done, the number has dropped. We're seeing that traffickers are being aware that if you go to the World Series and you engage in commercial sex, you will be caught. And so we're seeing a drop from it in the past year. Law enforcement uses this is a day that they concentrate most of their efforts in. They do proactive investigations and they go and execute them. So we're seeing that law enforcement here in Omaha, when it comes to sex trafficking, concentrates more on the child exploitation task force, which is FBI led. They do investigations, particularly here in Omaha. The task force with the Douglas County Sheriff's Department, as well as the Nebraska State Patrol, they engage as well in doing investigations. But fortunately, we're seeing that drop in regards to that event.
Good. Yeah. Progress.
Yeah.
Progress.
Yeah.
It is progress. And I think as a community, we're so much more aware of it. You know, I started with the WCA in 2013, and I feel like people weren't really talking about it. Even you know,
They weren't.
5 years ago.
They weren't.
They weren't talking about that, but it's so common. You know, it's hard to find people anymore who are like, you know, College World Series, and you're like, well, you know, it can be, there's this dark side of it. And most people we talk to anymore are like, we've heard about that. What can we do?
Yeah.
You know, we're really excited as an agency that this year because it's always what can we do as agencies too, to help and be there for victims. And not only do we see this big spike in trafficking, certainly during the Cultural Series, but sexual assault, it increases during the warmer weather, and certainly this intense excitement, and domestic violence too, always around sporting events. We always see a big spike for that. We're thrilled through some very generous donors. We have a bus. We've wrapped a Metro bus for the College World Series. So that information will be running through that area with you know, like a hotline, our 24/7 hotline number for people to call if they think they might see it, they think they might be experiencing it, and always just remind people to call 911 if they're concerned about something, even if they think like, oh, it's nothing. It was, you know, that was weird, but it's nothing. If you see something, say something. It's so simple, and let the professionals decide if they need to respond or not.
Learn that for a lot of things. We see something out of place or not right, we have to.
We need to report it.
Right. That's what good citizens do.
Exactly. Exactly.
Anybody else want to add to?
No, I just I see more involvement with the law enforcement. I see them even reaching out to us and saying, hey, what do you guys provide? I mean, because unless you know what we're doing, you don't know what we're doing, right? And so we love the fact that they reached out and said, what are you guys doing? Can we meet? So if we have a girl, she's an adult, we know we can bring her to you guys or call you guys, and you guys would be able to help her out. And we've created these cards for law enforcement so that if they have someone who's 19 and over who says, I really don't want help right now, but maybe at some point or whatever, they can give her this card, and we have a number that they can call. And we're able to then take it from there.
Seems to be one of the challenges is you have the Omaha Police Department, then you have Gretna, Valley.
Right.
You have down two different sheriffs. How is that coordination done? Because some of this crosses those boundaries. I see that would be a challenge.
And it is.
Yeah, it is.
They're all dedicated, but the coordination would be.
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges that the task force has is coordinating law enforcement to work with each other in investigations, because many of these investigations, they cross counties. And so at the moment, the task force is trying to create those networks. We have what we call regional task forces, where law enforcement agencies from that region actually meet with each other, discuss investigations, discuss any cases that may be pending or they're currently investigating, and when to do those and when to act on those investigations, which is fantastic. When it comes to the Omaha area, there is the Child Exploitation Task Force, and they have concentrated their efforts particularly in what is Sarpy, Douglas County, and they spread also a little bit towards Lincoln. So the task force, the Nebraska Human Trafficking Task Force, tries to coordinate with them and actually try to support them in whatever they need. However, there's always that jurisdiction issue when it comes to law enforcement. Who takes what? Who's going to take the lead? So we are working on creating that healthy relationship between both task forces and between law enforcement in Nebraska to work together.
That's great. The dollar question here. Oh, that's the Air Force term. What can we be doing legislatively, whether it's Congress or in Lincoln, to do better, to fight this?
I think it's critical, we talked about it earlier today, to first off, remember that 1% maybe of people actually choose to go into prostitution. And of that 1%, probably most of them have experienced some sort of abuse or assault in their lifetime, which is probably impacting their choice. And it's a victim. We're talking about victims. We're not talking about people who willingly decided this is exactly what I want to do with my life.
Right.
99% of that, and that 1% is a victim, more than likely anyway. And so just to remember that when we're trying to understand and wrap our heads around it, because it is, for someone who grew up in a healthy home, who had a fairly uneventful, not very traumatic experience in their own relationships, in their own upbringing, it's a difficult concept to understand that there's this place on the internet that people are buying and selling humans, people for sex.
Not including the dark web. That's
Exactly.
even
Worse.
deeper and worse.
It's so hard to understand. And sometimes it can seem like we can't do anything, but there are things we can do. And just to remember that, that these victims of sex trafficking, they've been told before, I'm going to help you. You're going to be, I'm going to take care of you, whether that is a well-meaning person or almost always their trafficker is telling them that, and they will let them down. They will be let down, and it's going to be hard for them to trust that next person. So when we come in, when Salvation Army comes in, when Julie and her team come in, it's a long process for us to build that trust and for them to actually believe we are here to help you. We are going to stick with you no matter what your choices are. You might make choices that we don't agree with, and that's okay. We're still here.
Yep.
You might need to walk away from us for a little while. If you want to come back, come back. We're here.
That's right.
And that's a hard concept for them to understand. And that is hard sometimes for the law to take into account as well. And so these updates in the laws, allowing more time for people to press charges, allowing records to be sealed, to just all of these different laws that people are talking about it, they're becoming aware, and we're so thankful that lawmakers aren't just thinking they know what's best, but they are talking to experts, they are talking to victims and people who have experienced
what I'm hearing is
it.
focusing on the trafficker and the folks who are doing the purchasing.
Right. I think that's very important too, because let's get real. There's a reason somebody sells somebody. What's wrong and broken there?
Right.
What's wrong and broken with the person buying? So there's a whole bunch of people involved here that legislation that everyone need to be focusing on. Our main focus is on the survivor. It's on the victim service side. But as far as legislation, there's so many things. Like I even said, let's talk about pornography and let's talk. On the.
A lot of people think pornography's victimless crime as well.
I know, and I could go on and on and on about that. But I think we can do better. Nebraska can do better. We look at these other states that are already doing it, and we look at Iowa. Iowa's way ahead of us already still.
So we can benchmark off some of the things they've done.
Right. Why not? You talk about what even the campaigns that Michigan's doing, and so I think I know that as organizations we're always more than happy to go to be a witness and sitting before a judiciary committee or whatever, and we're happy to do our part, whatever we can, on whatever level, just to I know that firsthand,
So I want to ask maybe one more question that will allow you to have some closing comments. Can you explain a little more, how do some of these victims feel trapped? What are some of the various ploys, or what is some of the things that they feel that ensnares them, whether it could be physical coercion or other, but I would appreciate hearing your
There's a physical, psychological component.
a psychological part?
Yes, particularly relationships. Many of them believe that they are in a healthy relationship, that it's their husband, that it's their boyfriend, and that person is taking those actions because they actually do care for them.
The father of their children, for example. So that goes into that coercion component. Many of them feel trapped in that way, or they don't realize that they're trapped.
Right.
So they're like, I'm in a healthy relationship. Why should I get out of this? We're doing this because I need the money, because we're going to go and travel, or because we're going to start a family together. So that can be a way why they're trapped. Some of them is just the physical harm that comes to it, or the substance abuse of it.
Right.
They may go into withdrawal. Their body needs that substance to continue their own lives, and or just the beatings, the physical harm that they get into it. Get from being trafficked. So there are many components that make an individual feel trapped or not being able to leave that world.
Right. Any other follow-on?
I think threats is
Threats?
pretty important. I'm gonna hurt your mom. I'm gonna hurt your dad. I'm gonna hurt your pets. And so especially in the child trafficking, I mean, that weight falls on the child. So of course they're not going to say anything out of fear that something's going to happen to the people they love.
And again, it's important to say 50% of the victims are underage. So it's a huge number. And
in Nebraska, most of the victims are from Nebraska. They're not from outside the state.
Yeah,
Right.
that's true.
There are actually individuals that were born and raised in Nebraska, and they're being trafficked in their hometowns by an individual.
right.
Who most of the time they know, and they know well. It's their parent, it's their uncle, it's their
Right.
their neighbor, their teacher, their boyfriend. It's so critical to remember. And I think Federico brought up a great myth. People think trafficking, oh, that's a foreign national being brought in from some other country. It's not, it's certainly not an American, and
Right.
it's certainly not a Nebraskan. And it is. It's in Nebraska. Mostly it's Nebraskans.
I'd like to give you all about a minute just to any closing thoughts. And Federico, we'll start with you.
So this has been a pleasure to be here and be able to discuss about sex trafficking here in Nebraska, particularly in Omaha. Through my work, I've seen that this is an important issue. It's actually a public health issue, and it affects all of us, whether or not we realize it. What I would close with is that if you feel that somebody's being trafficked, somebody needs help, call the National Human Trafficking Resource Center. They are the individuals who are the most capable to help you with whatever you need, whether it's you need some sort of service provided, whether it is that you need a law enforcement help. Call. It doesn't help. It doesn't hurt to call.
Right.
If you feel something that is wrong,
Better be safe than sorry.
Exactly. And that is very important when it comes to human trafficking, because people don't believe that it happens, or they just push it aside, and it may be in their face.
Elizabeth.
I would absolutely echo what Federico said, that if you think just in your gut, if something's not quite right, absolutely report it. And that national hotline is so critical. And that national hotline can absolutely connect you with all of us here. That's an important thing, I think, to understand. You will be connected back to services that will be near you and capable of serving you. But also, if you're listening to this and you think, like, gosh, I have to do something. I have to, check out our websites, understand more what we're doing. Right. We're all doing amazing work. We all have our
probably could use some volunteers and help.
We could absolutely all use volunteers. We can always use donors. We can always use people who are activists and ready to talk about the change they want to see in their states and their communities. So,
Julie.
I love what you just said too, and I love being here as a team and being with other organizations. I think that's vital in how we do things, and I am honored to be here as well. I thank you for doing this and putting this on and being here and opening up this discussion. I love
Honored
that.
to do so.
Yeah, so I personally appreciate that from you.
Well, I think we all have children, or at least I do. I'll just say, and if you think that's somebody's children out there, or child that's being scarred and victimized, and I think it puts it in perspective.
Absolutely.
Well, I'd like to share some contact information. You mentioned the National Human Trafficking Hotline. You can call that. That number is 888-373-7888, or you can text Be Free at 233-733. We'll put that information on our website too, for Congressman Bacon, which is bacon.house.gov. We'll get that up. And then I also have the contact information here for our panelists. Rejuvenating Women, you can be contacted at info@rejuvenatingwomen.org. Also, the Women's Center for Advancement. We've got a phone number and a website up there for you. And the Safety Program. There's a phone number and a email address for Federico that he can be contacted. But like I said, we will have that up on our website and on our social media platforms, as well, I believe, a recording of this. And thank you all so much for joining us. I appreciate the information. It's been very.
Thank you for what you do every day. You're making an impact on people's lives. And I want to thank those who are listening in today for your interest.
Yep.
This is a very important topic, and we thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.